So we've had a few weeks to come to some early conclusions on the Galaxy S8, and there's a lot to take in between new features, a big screen, and an even bigger price tag. But before the GS8 actually goes on sale, I want to give you my first thoughts on it, especially a few areas where I think a lot of blogs and commentators have been getting things wrong. So let's jump in. First up, Samsung's Bixby AI. Everyone seems to be desperate to jump to conclusions about Bixby, whether it's a success or a failure, and sure, the fact that the voice assistant won't be available at launch is a downer. For US English it'll be another month or so, for German and other languages think October at the earliest. However, all of this just speaks to the fact that Bixby on the GS8 right now is just the beginning of something much bigger. Samsung eventually sees Bixby living in all its connected products, but you've got to start somewhere, and right now that means a small number of Samsung apps on Samsung's flagship phone. Until the really interesting part of Bixby launches, the button on the side is basically going to double as a second home button, only one that takes you straight to the Bixby home panel. At the same time, Samsung wouldn't have given Bixby its own hardware key if it wasn't 100% behind building out this feature. Sure, Bixby in its current form isn't a reason to buy a GS8 over an iPhone or anything else, but it is something that's going to grow throughout the life of the phone. It's just going to take some time. Next, display and battery. Samsung's new phones have displays that are much larger than last year, with batteries that are the same size or smaller. So you'd think that would mean shorter battery life, but that's not quite true, for a few reasons. First of all, when you compare a GS7 to a GS8, you've got to remember that you have a different aspect ratio. The new phone is taller with a new 18.5:9 aspect. And that means you can't compare the diagonal measurements of both screens, 5.1 and 5.8 inches. The difference sounds huge. We're used to phablet class phones with 5.7-inch displays. But because the aspect ratio is different, the screen area of a GS8 at 5.8 inches is actually much smaller than, say, a Note 5 at 5.7 inches. So the total area that you're lighting up actually isn't that much bigger than last year. And sure enough, when DisplayMate measured power draw from the screens of the GS7 and GS8, the wattage was about the same. You've got a combination of things at work here. We're a year on from the S7 and Samsung's new panels are more efficient, and also the difference in screen area just isn't that great. The CPU also plays a big part in power consumption, and the move to a more efficient 10nm chip this time round compared to last year's 14nm parts will save some juice as well. Qualcomm boasts all kinds of power savings across the board in its Snapdragon 835 compared to last year's 820. The Galaxy S8's rear camera is something else that supposedly hasn't changed that much. Same resolution, same pixel size, same aperture as last year. After a bit of confusion to begin with, we now know that Samsung isn't using the exact same sensor as the GS7, it's a slightly newer version with largely identical specs. Either way, if you only pay attention to camera hardware, you're missing a vitally important piece of the puzzle. Both versions of the S8, whether they're Snapdragon or Exynos, have upgraded image signal processors and new software processing tricks. More and more this year, we're seeing how software processing makes a huge difference to the quality of photos from a phone. Look no further than the Google Pixel, LG G6 and Honor 8 Pro for examples of companies using software to go the extra mile. And that's exactly what Samsung's doing with the Galaxy S8 thanks to multi-frame photography. It's a technique where, a little bit like HDR, combines multiple exposures into one clearer image. It's basically Samsung's version of the Pixel's magically good HDR Plus mode. The Galaxy S7 already had a great camera, and even if the hardware hasn't changed all that much in the S8, the extra processing should be enough to make a huge difference in photos. And we can't talk cameras without getting to that thing next to the camera. That's right, that decidedly awkward fingerprint scanner, which, if rumors are to be believed, was a relatively last-minute addition because Samsung wasn't able to get its display-based fingerprint tech ready in time. Yes, it's not as easy to hit as, well, just about any fingerprint scanner in any modern smartphone if I'm honest, but I was surprised at how it wasn't impossibly difficult on the smaller S8. In any case, Samsung is well aware that putting a fingerprint scanner back there was going to be problematic. Once you set up a fingerprint and load the camera app for the first time, you'll see a message reminding you to wipe your finger grease off the camera lens. It's just going to be a thing in this phone, I think, so at least you've got a few other options for biometric security. Finally, let's talk Galaxy Note 8. There's been speculation that with the S8 Plus being so big this year, there just wasn't the need for a new Galaxy Note. Of course, thanks to Samsung's DJ Co, we know that there will be a Note 8, so where does that leave the Note series, especially after a calamitous 2016? Well, the Note line has jumped around a lot in terms of its role for Samsung over the years. Some years it would be this crazy technological showcase with new features and radically upgraded specs over the Galaxy S line. More recently with the Note 5 and Note 7, it's been basically the same phone with an S Pen and a bigger screen. It's possible Samsung could just add an S Pen to the GS8 Plus and call it a day. That wouldn't necessarily be the most exciting phone, but it still would be pretty good. But I think to give the Note brand a strong relaunch, Samsung needs to do more. And that means bringing the Note back to its origins as a phone with new technologies and features. There are a few obvious clues about what could be next for the Note. A fingerprint scanner built into display is a really obvious one. Dual cameras are another. In fact, Samsung's Exynos 9 announcement showed that the chip does have dual camera support, and if you're Samsung, you probably don't do that unless you have a specific product in mind. Then there's the question of a 4K screen, long rumoured for Note devices, and potentially a huge development for VR, eliminating the dreaded screen door effect for Gear VR users. Like Sony's 4K phones, a 4K Note 8 wouldn't necessarily run in 4K mode all the time. Look no further than the GS8's resolution scaling options to see how that might work. Those are just a few of the features Samsung could deploy to make the next Note a really exciting phone, and a good counterpoint to the more mainstream Galaxy S8. So that's my early take on the Galaxy S8. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our full review when that lands. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.